Somebody is observing you right today. Definitely not me, nor any state authority. Okay, perhaps by federal authorities, yet I am discussing something profound. Something that's been tracking mankind for thousands of years. The basic, instinctive desire to remain alone. To claim a fragment of this earth that belongs solely to yourself. One space wherein nobody critiques you, nobody disturbs you, and nobody asks you where you place those shears. We take this as given nowadays. We possess bedrooms, we utilize bathrooms with locks, we buy noise-blocking earphones alongside do not disturb settings. We hold the holy practice of acting we're not inside whenever anybody rings our doorbell. Yet here's one query which should have been keeping you awake at night, and shall now that I've sown this seed. What occurred before any of this existed? What occurred when you resided inside a cavern alongside 30 different humans, all of you resting on that exact floor, splitting the same fire, inhaling the exact air, and you merely desired 5 minutes by yourself? This is the tale of privacy before privacy existed. And believe me, things get weird. Let's begin at the absolute beginning. The origins of us, Homo sapiens, the species which seemingly gazed at its surroundings and pondered. Sure, but what if I might be isolated for a bit? For much of human prehistory, roughly 200,000 until 10,000 years past, our forebears survived as hunter-gatherers. Tiny, nomadic bands of 20 to 50 humans, continually traveling across terrains in pursuit of meals, water, and seemingly zero personal space. Ponder upon what this truly entails for one moment. You rise up in the morning encircled by people. You dine encircled by humans. You bicker, you chuckle, you weep, you do absolutely everything accompanied by the exact people every single day throughout your whole lifetime. There was zero notion of heading home. There was zero apartment to escape toward. There was zero doorway to shut. Your existence was, by definition, a collective experience from the second you were birthed until the second you perished. And historians analyzing these bands have uncovered something fascinating. They almost never discover proof of independent sleeping quarters. Zero separated rooms, zero partitioned zones inside shelters, only one huge shared space where everyone piled in together. Thus, here's the true question. Did those humans even desire privacy? Or is privacy something we created later, alongside taxes and passive-aggressive emails? Here's where things get philosophically interesting. Certain anthropologists contend that privacy, as a notion, is not natural for humans at all, because it's a byproduct of civilization, hierarchy, and the stockpiling of property. That before we possessed items to hide, before we possessed social status to protect, before we possessed secrets worth keeping, we simply didn't need to be alone. There's actually rather compelling proof regarding this. Numerous modern hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist today, spans in the Amazon, regions of Central Africa, isolated corners of Papua New Guinea, have been examined extensively. And what scientists continually discover is that those populations possess practically zero concept of physical privacy. The Pirahan tribe of the Brazilian Amazon, for example, traditionally slumber in tight groups, execute almost every activity inside communal spaces, and do not possess a cultural framework regarding the notion that specific information or behavior must be hidden from their group. It's not because they lack any sense of self, it's because the self for them is not something which requires a closed door. Now, before you begin romanticizing this as some sort of pure, liberated existence, stop, because the dark side of this means that everything you perform is subject to collective judgment, commentary, alongside unsolicited opinion. You cough incorrectly, and everybody has thoughts about it. You're in a foul mood, and there is nowhere, literally nowhere on earth you might visit to merely be in a foul mood by yourself. That sounds like one absolute nightmare. But wait, because even inside those early societies, privacy wasn't entirely absent. It merely looked completely distinct from whatever we know. The initial type of human privacy wasn't spatial. It wasn't a room, nor a wall, nor a locked box. It remained behavioral. Ancient humans developed something which anthropologists term civil inattention. It's the social agreement, quiet and unspoken, to simply not stare, to not comment, to pretend you didn't see or hear something, even when you clearly did. You observe this even today. Two strangers inside an elevator, a couple having a quiet dispute inside a restaurant, someone weeping on the subway. The whole social contract of city living is constructed upon this invisible agreement. I shall act as though I cannot view what I can clearly view, and you shall return the favor. This was our original privacy. Not one room, not one wall, a collective choice to mind your own business. And it functioned, mostly, because inside tiny hunter-gatherer tribes, where survival relied upon cooperation plus social harmony, violating this unspoken rule, prying, gossiping maliciously, forcing confrontation, proved genuinely dangerous. You might destabilize the group. You might trigger conflict that nobody could afford. Social invisibility became enforced not through law, but through collective survival instinct. Thus, ancient humans possessed privacy. It merely lived inside other people's eyes, instead of architecture. Then farming occurred, and everything became complicated. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years passed, humans across various parts of the globe independently started cultivating their own food. They quit migrating. They constructed permanent settlements. And suddenly, for the first time throughout human history, you possessed something worth protecting. Your grain supplies, your livestock, your land. And the instant you acquire property, you require privacy. Because privacy at its center revolves around control. Control regarding your information, your belongings, your body, your decisions. And you cannot maintain control if everyone might walk into your life whenever they desire. That is when walls became more than mere shelter. That is when the architecture of privacy was birthed. Archaeological digs from the earliest agricultural settlements, locations like Çatalhöyük within modern Turkey, dating back roughly 9,000 years, reveal something remarkable regarding how populations started organizing their lives. Those settlements appeared densely packed, dwellings constructed wall to wall, almost zero streets, residents literally entering their homes through openings inside the roof. And yet, within those structures, you begin to observe something new. Distinct areas, sleeping platforms elevated off the dirt, specific zones for cooking, for sleeping, for storage. The inside of the dwelling becoming a structured, intentional space, rather than simply a spot to stay out of the rain. Humans were beginning to organize their private lives architecturally. The dwelling was becoming, for the first time, a receptacle for the self. However, here's something archaeology seldom puts a spotlight upon, children. Inside those early agricultural settlements, children possessed essentially zero private life whatsoever, and the fascinating thing is, nobody believed that felt unusual. Youth slept inside the exact room alongside parents and siblings. They observed the complete spectrum of adult life since birth. Disputes, sorrow, sickness, intimacy, all of this played out in front of youthful eyes with zero filtering. That is not neglect. That is not dysfunction. That is merely what life appeared like when walls remained a recent invention, and space represented a premium resource. However, what's fascinating is that youths inside those societies develop their private lives differently as a result. Rather than one physical space, they utilize time. The periods alone foraging, managing livestock, fetching water. Those solitary chores offered children a type of privacy which the architecture of that dwelling couldn't provide. Mobility meant freedom. The chore which sent you outside of the settlement, however briefly, became a doorway into your own mind. Even nowadays, within communities lacking the luxury of private bedrooms, children instinctively discover their private spaces through time and motion, rather than walls. They ascend a tree nobody else from river. They locate a specific rock near some river. They sculpt a tiny empire from within the landscape, which belongs psychologically completely to themselves. The human desire for private space does not vanish simply because nobody constructs it just for you. It assumes another shape. Next, let's address the topic everybody is pondering about, yet nobody ever wishes to speak out loud: toilets, or more specifically, the ancient absence thereof. Because whenever you wish to comprehend ancient privacy, you must understand that throughout most of human history, bodily functions remained not private in any way. And that is not some minor footnote throughout history. This remains central regarding the whole narrative. Inside prehistoric cultures, elimination occurred wherever and whenever nature demanded it. Collective or solo, there existed zero designated private zone for this. Zero etiquette, zero door, zero awkward small talk whilst waiting for somebody to finish inside the restroom. Even within the grand ancient empires, the situation remained not what we'd desire. The Romans, whose civilization generated aqueducts, highways, concrete, alongside some genuinely impressive legal philosophy, maintained public latrines called foracae, which were basically long stone benches featuring holes carved out set above a running water channel. You rested side by side next strangers. You initiated conversation. There exist actual ancient graffiti, alongside literary references, implying that citizens bumped into acquaintances, hosted business meetings, and traded gossip inside the latrines. The Romans felt not embarrassed regarding this. They felt, in truth, somewhat proud concerning their sanitation infrastructure, which, compared against whatever came beforehand and whatever would follow after the collapse of Rome, they absolutely had every right to be. The affluent, of course, discovered ways bypassing the communal bathroom problem, as the affluent have repeatedly done throughout all of history, across every conceivable domain. Personal chamber pots, servants to manage all the aftermath, alongside separate toilet rooms inside larger villas. Wealth has constantly purchased privacy. That dynamic remains ancient. Speaking regarding the affluent, let us discuss ancient Egypt, because Egypt represents where the architecture of private life becomes genuinely fascinating. Egyptian dwellings for common citizens were basic mud brick structures, typically 1 or 2 rooms, the entire family residing in close proximity. Privacy remained again mostly behavioral. The notion of personal space existed, yet the physical area to practice it did not. Yet inside elite households, nobles, priests, top officials, we witnessed something remarkable emerge. Multi-room estates featuring dedicated bedroom chambers, reception halls separated from private family areas, plus evidence regarding what we might term backstage spaces, sections of the house closed against visitors and guests. This feels enormously significant, since it indicates that by roughly 3000 BCE, certain humans had not merely developed a concept of private life, but had constructed entire architectural systems to enforce it. You, being a guest entering an Egyptian noble's dwelling, would be hosted within specific public rooms. You could never view the family's private quarters. You could never access the zones reserved for intimate living. Sounds familiar? Because that is currently exactly how privacy operates during formal social contexts today. However, here's what's truly fascinating. Regarding ancient Egyptian concepts of privacy, they expanded this toward the afterlife. The Purjet, literally house of eternity, was what they named the tomb. The burial chamber, the most intimate zone of all, the location where the actual physical corpse would rest, was designed to stay permanently closed, sealed, and private forever. The ancient Egyptians desired privacy so intensely they attempted to construct it into death itself. Let's switch continents and discuss ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, where the initial urban civilizations on Earth arose. Cities like Uruk, which by 3000 BCE might have contained up to 50,000 humans, which represents a lot of humans for the ancient world. And whenever you pack 50,000 humans living in close proximity, privacy becomes a pressing societal issue. Whatever we discover within Mesopotamian legal codes, the most famous being the Code of Hammurabi from roughly 1754 BCE, proves revealing. There exist specific statutes regarding property boundaries, regarding entering someone's dwelling without permission, regarding the defense of domestic spaces against intrusion. This feels genuinely remarkable. The notion of the household as a private, safeguarded zone had grown so crucial that it needed to be enshrined within law. Breaking inside someone's house, unlawful entry, was already one serious offense nearly 4,000 years past. And the punishment for housebreaking under Hammurabi's rules, you were to be executed at your point of entry. Specifically, they would slay you and entomb you inside the wall of that house you attempted to break into. Nobody was joking around regarding home invasions throughout ancient Babylon. Ancient Greece provided us philosophy, democracy, alongside the Olympic Games. It additionally provided us one of the most complicated and contradictory histories regarding private life across the ancient world. On one side, Greek public living was intensely communal. The agora, the primary public square, represented the heart of civic living, political debate, commerce, philosophy, socializing. All of this occurred in public, in sight of everybody. Visibility equaled status. To be spotted inside the agora, participating in public life, meant to be a full citizen. On the opposite hand, the Greek dwelling, the oikos, remained fiercely private. And here's where things become complicated. Whoever got to experience such privacy relied enormously upon who you were. Greek citizen males possessed both public and private lives. They operated within the agora and withdrew toward the oikos, the best of both worlds. Greek females, especially inside Athens, were required to stay almost completely inside the domestic realm. The private household acted simultaneously as their shelter and prison. They remained missing from public affairs, not because they selected privacy, but because privacy was imposed upon them through societal norms which equated feminine visibility with indecency. There existed one term within ancient Greek denoting the private realm, idion, from which we derive the word idiot, because for the Greeks, anybody who solely operated within the private sphere and never engaged with public affairs was, frankly, deemed a lesser human, a human lacking full civic existence. Privacy was appreciated, yet too much privacy, mandatory isolation, represented a type of social death. There's one additional ancient civilization that merits attention here, and it's one which seldom receives credit regarding its sophisticated dynamic concerning private living: ancient China. Throughout the Zhou dynasty, and entering the Warring States era, roughly 1000 until 200 BCE, Chinese philosophical schools formulated some of the most nuanced philosophies concerning private life that the ancient world generated. Confucianism, which became the prevailing societal philosophy, was essentially a detailed instruction manual for navigating the boundary separating public duties and private self. The notion of li, ritual propriety, dictated precisely how a citizen must act within every public setting. How you welcomed your superior, how you sat during a formal banquet, how you addressed your father versus your buddy versus some stranger. Everything possessed a mandated format. Everything represented performance within the most deliberate sense. Yet Confucianism remained also profoundly aware that such performance proved exhausting, that behind every public facade existed a private individual who required space to simply be. The private household inside Confucian ideology represented where authentic connections thrived. The bond between husband and wife, between parent and offspring, these were held to a different standard than public conduct. They stayed shielded against the formality of public living precisely since authenticity demands privacy. That is one extraordinarily modern realization. The notion that you cannot act authentic in public, that performance alongside authenticity exist in fundamental conflict, and that private space represents where the true human being dwells. This is not some 21st century psychological concept. It remains a 2,500-year-old Chinese philosophical idea. Within ancient Rome, things progressed further. The Romans cultivated an extraordinarily advanced dynamic concerning private and public living, one which appears in many respects remarkably modern. Elite Roman dwellings, the domus, were architecturally constructed for managing the border separating public and private using great precision. The forward portion of the dwelling, the atrium and tablinum, appeared semi-public. Clients arrived here for morning meetings alongside their patron. Commerce was executed. Societal duties were fulfilled. You displayed your public mask toward the world here. Yet deeper back inside the dwelling, past invisible yet very real societal barriers, lay the private quarters. The triclinium for intimate dinner gatherings, the cubiculum, the bedroom, the hortus, the personal garden. Those spaces were not for guests. Those spaces were for family, for trusted confidants, for that version of yourself which was not performing for an audience. The Romans even maintained legal safeguards regarding this boundary. Roman legislation acknowledged that the household remains sacred. Domus sua quicie est tutissimum refugium. Every man's dwelling is his safest sanctuary, a doctrine which predates English common laws. An Englishman's home is his castle, by over 1,000 years. The Romans additionally wrestled quite visibly with the conflict separating the surveillance of authority and the craving for personal privacy. Rulers employed informants. Neighborhoods contained watchers. Social living meant performance, and performance necessitated an audience. The poet Martial authored extensively regarding the annoyance of early morning salutatio, the ritualistic duty to host clients and guests at sunrise whenever you'd truly rather remain asleep. Certain aspects regarding being a public individual have not shifted in 2,000 years. Yet perhaps the most profound and ignored facet of ancient private life remains the inner dimension. Physical privacy, the shut doorway, the isolated chamber, is one matter. Yet what regarding mental privacy? The private identity? The internal world which nobody else might access? This represented something ancient humans comprehended with extraordinary profundity, and in certain ways they defended it more aggressively than any wall could. Handwritten journals, intimate letters, personal prayers directed solely toward individual gods. These were ancient methods of internal privacy. They forged a zone within language itself, a sealed chamber inside communication, where the self might act honest in ways which public performance never allowed. The correspondence from the Roman statesman Cicero toward his companion Atticus, letters he explicitly stated were not intended for anyone else's eyes, expose a man who seemed publicly a titan of rhetoric and confidence, yet privately devoured by anxiety, sorrow, ambition, and self-doubt. The private Cicero alongside the public Cicero appeared nearly two separate individuals. This is something profoundly human, the divide separating who we appear in public versus who we remain in private, the upkeep of a societal mask alongside a private face. Ancient humans perceived this not as hypocrisy, but as sophistication, as the price of civilization. Thus, what does all of this teach us? It teaches us that privacy is not some modern invention, it represents a human necessity, one which has been expressed, negotiated, battled over, architecturally encoded, legally shielded, and philosophically debated for as long as humans have remained complex enough to possess something worth hiding. It shows us that the specific shape of privacy has constantly mirrored the societal structure surrounding it. Hunter-gatherers utilized behavioral privacy. Farming societies constructed spatial privacy. Empires established legal privacy, and all of them at every phase maintained what you might term psychological privacy. The inner existence which persists regardless of walls or laws or societal surveillance. And this teaches us something mildly uncomfortable. Privacy has never felt equally apportioned. It has always remained a luxury. The powerful acquired more of it. The wealthy erected walls around it. Females were denied it, whilst males claimed it for themselves. Enslaved individuals possessed none of it at all. Throughout ancient Rome, enslaved humans slumbered within the rooms where they labored, in the hallways, in spaces without titles, perpetually visible, perpetually available, perpetually without that sanctuary which their master took for granted every single evening. Privacy, historically, has not been one right. It has remained a privilege, one which had to be battled for, legislated into reality, and remains still, across much of the globe, not guaranteed. The next instance you shut your bedroom door, or put on earphones, or simply sit somewhere by yourself for a few minutes, you are partaking in one of the oldest human dramas there is, the perpetual negotiation separating the individual and the community, separating the self and the world. Ancient people sat near the edge of their fires, observing the darkness, desiring the exact thing you crave whenever you lock the restroom doorway and simply stand there for an extra 3 minutes, doing absolutely nothing. That urge is not modern. That urge is not Western. That urge is not some product of individualism or capitalism or the creation of the single-family home. That urge remains as ancient as the first human who gazed around at the 29 other individuals they lived alongside and thought, I just need 1 minute,